In a world awash in uncertainty.
Get off my back. I'm trying the best I can.
Wait, what?
Swamp Thing?
Yeah, I know Swamp Thing, but why did he not resurface?
Well, he hasn't been in movies for 20, 30 years now.
I'm pretty sure that means that they shift him.
Two brave heroes take on all things action.
Hey guys, welcome to another edition of All Things Action Video Cast. I'm your host, Aaron, aka Dad, and with me is my little boy, Raiden. That's not true.
Hello.
Who are you?
Who am I? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kyle. If you listen to my podcast, the Knowledge from the Couch podcast, you will, first of all, recognize these dulcet tones. And secondly, I've been sort of self-promoting myself, saying that I was going to appear on your show here. So I don't break my promises. Here I am with my good friend Aaron, and we're gonna talk a little bit about history today. We're gonna talk about some historical things, some stuff that I've probably covered in my show. If you've listened, if you haven't, you should go ahead and do that whenever. But we're gonna cover some topics that I've talked about in the context of the All Things Action video cast. So
That's
right. I will leave it to you to, and lead me forward.
It's an adult video cast / podcast today, as we are drinking beers while we do this. Yep. So bear with me as I drink heavily.
There you go. It helps loosen up the inhibitions a little bit, so that we don't sound so I don't know what I'm going to say. The words are already escaping me.
That's right.
Let's just continue forward.
and we go live with this, so it's nice and fun. But yeah, Kyle is one of my really good friends. We've known each other for probably, 10 years now.
Good decade, yeah.
12 years, something like that. Used to work together, and luckily he's one of those guys that I'm very privileged to say after all those years we're still really good friends. And Kyle's podcast is the reason for this video cast, and it's kind of funny because I would say probably in a roundabout way, our discussions before you started your podcast really kind of springboarded you into your podcast. And again, if you guys haven't listened to it, please check it out. Knowledge from the Couch podcast. It's a wonderful show. Kyle has a very fresh take on history, and he covers. You're in your second season now.
Yeah, I've done nearly 30 episodes of the show now, so I have something like on the order of 12 or 13 hours worth of content overall, and a large variety of subject matter. So pretty much there's something for everybody to listen to. If you like, different themes from history, I've talked about presidents, I've talked about regular folk, I've talked about more ancient people, very contemporary people, doctors, lawyers, this, that, and the other thing. So there's something for everybody on there. And if you like what I'm doing now, you can obviously see me gesticulating a lot. I do that too with my show, but it's a podcast, so you will never see that.
And so now you get to see it.
Now you have a voice and face to match up with what you would be hearing on my show normally. But it's good to be here, man. I'm really appreciative that we were able to collaborate like this, and we'll have a collaboration on my show as well. Once I get it figured out. But we will do this one first, and we'll cover a whole bunch of stuff. It's going to be a good time.
But the cool thing about Kyle's show, whether he knows it or not, is he has covered some pretty action hero type figures from history. I don't know if you did that blatantly or if it was just kind of organically happened or what.
I think it's less. It's more organic, I think it would be the way, because I think between you and I, and why we get along so well, is because we have a lot of interests that intersect, a lot of interests that overlap. So while you may not know as much about these people as I do, or maybe not have heard of them until I've done them, I think just that overarching, like when I see a story, I look for certain qualities of whatever I want to cover, and it just happens to be that these people have done crazy stuff,
awesome stuff, yeah.
So it's just like, well, because that's what an interesting story is. You want to find somebody who either has done something insane and ridiculous, or somebody who literally seems like a superhuman based on the kind of stuff that they've accomplished. Because your regular Joes, for the most part, just kind of go along in life, and most of these people were regular type folk, and then they just do something crazy, and then that makes them interesting. So, it's more about the interesting with me, but it happens that these people are just nuts all the time. So maybe not so much intentionally, but I think it kind of happened just by accident.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, some of the names that kind of get thrown around as far as impactful figures that you've spoken about on your podcast: Emmett Till, Onesimus, right? Is that how you say it?
That's how you say it, yes.
As you know, I butcher the
Okay.
English language pretty regularly.
For those who can't see, he has the phonetic spelling of it right here. That's the little movie magic I'm going to let you in on behind the scenes.
Like this one, Malala
Yousafzai.
And Nellie Bly.
That's an easy one.
Yeah, so, a lot of those people really, the way I kind of looked at all of those was like, if it weren't for the sacrifices they had made or the things that they have done, we wouldn't be in a better place than we were before. I guess that's the way I kind of look at those kind of folks. And then obviously, as far as villains go, you have a couple of mad scientists and Walter Freeman and Robert Liston. I mean,
although I will say, Walter Freeman probably was a little bit more of a villain because he was, Mister, I'm going to stick an ice pick up your nose and lobotomize you. And he was so interesting, and you'll have to go back and listen to my episode where I go into great detail of it. But suffice it to say, the dude turned lobotomies into like a sport. I mean, he was just like, how many can I crank out a day? And it's like, bro, okay. It's people's brains you're scrambling here. But I will say, though, Robert Liston, I would actually kind of compare him to be more of an anti-hero type than a villain, because he did what he had to do in a very gruesome way. Robert Liston, if you don't know, is a surgeon who used to cut people's limbs off in a time before anesthesia really existed. So you can imagine how gruesome and awful that was, just by the nature of it. But he didn't do it because he liked to cut people's limbs off and he got a kick out of it. He did it because that was his job as a surgeon. He was very fast at it, and he actually had a really good survival rate for his people compared to a lot of men at the time who were working in this.
Yeah, there were other assholes that were doing this, and they were way worse at it.
Way worse. I think the thing about him is the bravado that he brought, because he wanted to be fast. Like, he took pride in being super quick at what he did, and as a result, he would cut other people's stuff off too. His most infamous case, was the 300% mortality case, where he was going to cut off this dude's leg, who was the patient, and then cut off his assistant's fingers, who was holding the person for him, and then there was another guy in the crowd who had a heart attack because of the stress of the situation. So the patient died, his assistant died of infection, and the other dude died of a heart attack. So 1 patient, 3 deaths. I mean, pretty nuts. But
that'll drive up your mortality rate.
It's true. Good, right? But overall, his mortality rate for a guy in the time where you were just cutting limbs off and hoping somebody wouldn't die was pretty good. He was usually 4 or 5 times more effective than pretty much anybody else. And he did it because he loved doing it. And it was what it was. He would help poor people out who couldn't afford to do surgeries. He was kind of that, Batman-y type, where he's like, he did what he had to do, because he was the hero that everybody, need or deserved, or whatever it is, not the one that we all needed at the time. So true. And I see you have another name on there, Mr. Asshole himself, Christopher Columbus.
Yeah. So if you guys, by far one of my favorite episodes that you covered was Christopher Columbus, and just highbrow talking points here. Why was he such an asshole?
Here's the thing about Chris Columbus, Mr. Columbus. He got blown out of proportion for what he did. So if you're like any American school kid, you probably heard, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He's Mr. Man who discovered America, and we can all owe our existence in this continent because of a guy like him. Well, that's really not super true. It's partially true because he was the first European. Actually, I should retract that. The first European in the exploration age to make it into the Americas, although Leif Erikson and his Vikings actually made it many hundreds of years before, but they didn't stick around. So, but he was a dum-dum. That's the first thing. People think Columbus is a smart guy. He's just a total dipshit. Excuse my language. He didn't know. he felt like the Earth was round, right? Everybody's like, oh, everybody else thought the Earth was flat, but Mr. Columbus is so damn smart, he thought it was round. Like, no, dude, everyone thought the Earth was round at this time. If you thought it was flat, you were also a dumb person.
Right.
And this is the times you lived in. I mean, you had the higher-ups who were educated, and you had the middle class that was like, well, it's a toss-up whether or not you know anything, and then, the peasantry, which is just dumb or whatever. But those who knew were very certain that the Earth was round, and a lot of people had already predicted very closely, in fact, that the Earth was a certain size, and they knew how big it was. The thing most people didn't know was that there was a giant landmass made up of North and South America in between Europe and Asia. So most people thought you could sail westward from Europe and make it to Asia, except that the ocean, like imagine that North and South America just didn't exist and it was just only ocean. Like nobody could make that journey. That would just kill you. So when Columbus thought the Earth was much smaller than it was, and he figured you just bump right into Japan, right into India, and you just make it there. And he bugged so many people for a job, and everybody was like, no, you're dumb. No, you're dumb. Go away. No, you're dumb. And then the Spanish, looking for any kind of foothold, were like, yeah, okay, have some ships, go for it. Because they figured if he dies and he's dumb and whatever, we don't care. We didn't get rid of anything. And he finds something, we're not out anything either, and we'll take what he finds. Right. So he sails, and he sails, and he sails, and a lot of his men are looking for, land and going, oh, this guy has gotten us into something. And most people aren't really aware how close his crew was to total mutiny. Like, they thought they were just lost forever, and they were just going to do what sailors do when they're lost in the middle of the ocean. Then they spot land, which, by the way, Columbus claims that he was the first one to spot land. When they did it, he wasn't. One of his crewmen was. But he took credit for it because he's a dick. And what they found were what we call now the East Indies. They're called the Indies because he thought it was India. They're not. It's, the Caribbean Isles. But he thinks that he's basically popped into the Indies and Japan. That's where he thinks he hit.
Because the world is that small.
That's what he thought. And it's weird because Asians at that time were very well known to Europeans, and he must have known that the people he ran into, natives of these islands, didn't look like Asians that he would run into if he went to Japan. But he didn't care because he's a dum-dum and didn't whatever. So they went around, and he made a lot of different journeys. He picked up stuff, brought him back to Spain. Everybody freaks out because he found something. Comes back and forth. During his governorship of Hispaniola, which is the Dominican Republic in Haiti, that big island, he was responsible for a mass genocide of the Taino Island people that lived there, to the point where I think there was something like 1% left after it had gotten over. He used to... Because the big thing back in those days was gold. Gold was the thing everybody wanted. Just want gold. And he figured, I'm going to go to this place, and we're going to go get gold. There's mountains of gold everywhere. He claims the natives tell him there's gold. They probably didn't tell him that. They're nice people, and they probably were just trying to appease him, and because they knew he was like a dictator, basically. And so he's trying to get these natives to go mine gold and stuff for him in these islands. Well, they don't find any, and then the way he would often punish them is if they didn't bring back enough gold for their quota of the month, he would chop a hand off and then make them wear it around their neck, because that's what you did at the time. He and his buddies being the men who were under his employ, used to sharpen their swords on little kids. So if you are into killing little kids for no good reason other than to see how sharp your sword is, that's a Columbus thing as well. And like I said, the devastation from disease and murder of the native populations, and even most of his men at some point were just like, this guy is seriously fucked up. So that's the Columbus for you. Yeah, here we are pretending like it's a good thing.
So the question I've always wanted to ask you after listening to that is why, after all of this evidence is out there, and it is woefully apparent that the Vikings and Leif Erikson were here well before.
Yep.
Why is that not being taught in the schools right now? Like, what's your opinion on this?
I think it's getting to the point where it's getting taught more often.
Okay.
I remember when I was in school, Leif Erikson was mentioned, and I think I only picked up on it because I liked this sort of thing. So in my head, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because it goes against the whole, like, oh, no European ever touched North America until, but obviously the Vikings had hopped, skipped, and jumped from Iceland to Greenland to present-day Newfoundland up in Canada, and, it was just one of those things that, excuse me, I forget the author's name at the time in my episode. You can go listen to it. But wrote a book, sort of like, pushing this narrative that Columbus was this well-to-do man, this like good Christian boy, spreading Christianity and the good things that Europeans would bring over or whatever, and that was the thing. And it just sort of went like that, and everybody's like, oh, Columbus, there's Columbus Day, and the District of Columbia, where Washington is named after Columbus. Columbia, the nation in South America, is named after Columbus. So I did the episode because I just want more people to know that this guy was a historical dickhead, so he doesn't deserve the day he gets or any admiration. He was a brave enough man to sail into the middle of nothing, so I mean, I'll give him credit for doing that, but he died never knowing that he made it to a different continent. He thought to his dying day that he made it to Asia, so he never knew that he was wrong. And I don't think he ever felt remorse for the terrible things he did to innocent native people who had no clue, were living their lives in this island, and then one day these dudes roll up out of nowhere
and just stake the claim
and do what they want, like they own the place. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, that he might of most of the people on your list, he might be the biggest villain of them all.
Well, I do say that you do a very good job of looking at the heavy hitters of a positive influence in the world, and less of the ones that were just complete assholes or villains, or however you want to look at it. So I thought it'd be kind of funny, not funny, kind of fun to maybe look at historical figures that you've covered, and maybe look at like superhero equivalents. And if I'm way off base, let me know.
Yeah.
And and then I'm saving 2 at the end so that you can fill them in, because I think those 2 you probably have a really good idea as who you would pick. So the Harlem Hellfighters.
Yep.
I would say that those gentlemen were much like Captain America and the Sentinels of Liberty, as far as they went in there, and you talk about the old Captain America comics where he'd go up and punch a Nazi in the face.
Yep.
And I mean, from what I got from the podcast, the Nazis, the Germans were actually fearful of the Harlem Hellfighter. Like they gave them that name because they shit their pants when they had to deal with those guys, right?
Yeah, you had these men who, if you listen to my episode, this is the World War I crew of black men from mostly Harlem in New York, but a couple other places, but mostly Harlem. And they were ultra disrespected. I mean, this is a time where black men and women couldn't vote in the United States. Even in New York, a fairly progressive state, still fairly looked against and segregated. One of the generals wouldn't allow their regiment to, and I didn't say this in the podcast because I couldn't find a good place to put it, but one of the generals that was marching a lot of the other New York regiments before they were going to head over with the expeditionary force to Europe wouldn't allow them to march with them because he said, and I quote, "Black isn't a color in the rainbow." So you could see, even though it's a bunch of white people, and white also isn't a color in the rainbow, it is what it is.
It's on the spectrum.
It's one of those things where just like any excuse you could have for racism was apparent, and so these guys, and by the way, they weren't conscripted either. Conscripted being drafted. These guys all volunteered. These were all guys who wanted to go fight, yet they were given this really high regiment number, which is usually reserved for conscripted men. So that was a major disrespect to them too. Then when they went overseas, none of the American people wanted to be in command of this regiment. They didn't want to command a regiment of black men. So most of the Harlem Hellfighters actually fought with the French because the French were cooler with it. They're like, whatever, we need men. A lot of people have died. You guys are cool. We don't care. Like, come fight with us. So if you ever see historical pictures of the Harlem Hellfighters, they're typically wearing French military gear, like the helmet with the point. They're using French weapons. They're
legionnaires.
They're doing. They're basically fighting on behalf of America for the French, though, and they were, nicknamed the Hellfighters because they saw frontline combat from basically the minute they got over there till the end of the war, which is outrageous because for the most part, men only saw so much combat, then they had to go to the back lines because it's horrific, awful trench warfare that was just, I can only imagine the amount of PTSD that these guys were, but nobody, was shell shocked back then or whatever it was, and they were fierce fighters because they had something to prove. It was the chip on their shoulder sort of thing. So the Germans were the ones who nicknamed them the Hellfighters because they would just come screaming at them and making it happen. And, there's a couple guys who, of the Hellfighters who, 2 dudes fought off a basically an entire platoon of Germans at night because they were on night watch, and you had to do that with
crazy,
with trenches, and they
story.
they both got shot a bunch of times, and they fought them off, and then it's just like, how can you can imagine being these German soldiers being like, yeah, there's 2 dudes, this should be easy, and then just getting like dominated by these guys, like, oh boy, we gotta go, we gotta leave, and that sticks with you, And
I think a lot of that just came down to heart too.
Yeah.
They just had more heart, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I've never been in that position, so I wouldn't know what it's like to be shot at. But yeah, you want to think that you'd point the gun the other way and just start mowing down people and being strategic. But yeah, it's pretty incredible. Those guys, I definitely recommend that, and all of your podcasts, obviously the episodes. But that one was a really fun one.
Yep.
The next one, Mad Jack Churchill. Kind of like Captain America, he's actually one of Captain America's guys. Timothy Dum Dum Duggan.
Yep.
Just because it seems like it's so interesting how you could see where guys like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby could take from real people, and that's almost one of those guys where, because this guy played bagpipes when he was going into battle.
This guy didn't care. I mean, you think about World War II, and you're like, it's 1940s.
Yeah,
there's machine guns. It's modern war for the most part. Like, if you look at World War II, and then you look at, like, say, the Persian Gulf War in the 90s, there's not that much difference between what kind of weaponry and technology is being used, besides maybe like aircraft, but really ground war didn't change a lot. This guy's rolling into combat with, he had the bagpipes, which he played, which is nuts to begin with, just bagpipe guy.
Right.
He took a bow and arrow into combat. He killed a guy with his bow and arrow, being the only guy.
He's the only guy who killed somebody in the war with a bow and arrow.
Just bow and arrow. I could only imagine what that dude thought. Like, he went to war that day.
He's like, I'm gonna go kill some people.
I'm dead. He's like, maybe I'll get shot. And then he does get shot with an arrow. And it's like, oh my God, I'm dying because of this arrow? Yeah. What's happening?
He's the only guy to shoot somebody with a bow and arrow. And then there's a statistic that says the only guy to be shot with a bow and arrow.
Yeah,
like with.
And then
that's me.
He also that's that guy. He also brandished a sword into battle because that's what you do. It's 1944, but you're pretending it's 1744, and you're brandishing a sword. And he shot a gun too, but he was just a crazy weird dude. And yeah, I mean, like, Dum Dum Dugan is just the same sort of guy. He just get in there, he didn't care.
Give a crap.
He just would do his thing, and everybody's like, well, this is Dum Dum Dugan doing his thing, and it's just like, there you go. Yep. Mad Jack's a lot like him.
Absolutely.
For sure.
My favorite, I got to tell you, my favorite podcast that you've done though was the Simo.
Yep.
Hey-ha.
You know what? This one,
the White Death.
This one, my pronunciation was wrong the whole time. My younger sister Amber she's very interested in Scandinavian and then the Finnish language and stuff like that. So she listened. She's like, it was really good, but you said his name wrong the whole time. I'm like, shit. Well, classic white dude trying to pronounce this guy. Simo Heiha, or I said Heiha a lot. Yeah. Heiha. It's something like that. You know him as the White Death.
And I thought the Punisher immediately. Yep. And when I was listening to it, it was like, this is it. This is the equivalent. This is where the Punisher came from, besides the whole kill your family thing. Because this guy did not give a shit.
Yep.
And he was so smart. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you want to go into a different genre, John Wick, right? Yep. You know, like John Wick is trained assassin, good at what he does. Mm-hmm. This guy used to eat snow in the snow so that the vapor wouldn't come out of his mouth. That's how good he was.
Yep.
I mean,
he's, to me, and I like your Punisher analogy, but I would say he's actually like a mix between the Punisher and, say, like Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Because of the intense accuracy he had.
Very accurate.
He was definitely ruthless. He killed a lot of guys, for the little unassuming 5'3" Finnish man, you know. He's a farmer, gets his gun out, his old gun, like it's a late 1800s like Soviet rifle, because Finland's next to Russia, and so there's a sharing of culture and technology. And then just this old crappy rifle, and no scope. He just uses the iron sights on that thing, and he just picks guys off every day. During the winter, in Finland, where there's like 3 hours of sunlight a day, he's still able to knock off like 5 guys a day on average. And, he puts the snow in his mouth so that the vapor doesn't come up. He builds snow mounds so that when he put his gun in it and the recoil wouldn't blow snow up so nobody would see where he was. And he wore all white, so he was tough to see. Without the scope, there was no glare, so he often would pick other snipers off because he would see their glare, kill them before they could find him. It got to the point where the Russians were so spooked that they sent artillery strikes after one guy. Like, that's very Punisher-esque.
They'd mow down a whole forest.
That's very Punisher-esque.
Just to get one guy.
Where you send a...
And they still couldn't get him.
They couldn't get him. They never got him.
At one point, they hit him, kind of.
Yep.
But he still was
fine.
lived.
Like, he was fine.
He was fine,
yep. He's an interesting dude.
Had a little bit of the droopy face,
Well, they did blow off part of his jaw. But I mean, tough guy. Got part of his jaw blown off, and he was still fine. But I kind of like to say he's Punisher-esque in the way he was so ruthless with his killing, and it wasn't really so much like the Punisher is very much like I'm killing you because it's revenge. It's revenge. I'm angry. You killed my wife and kids. I'm gonna murder everybody, and I have no filter. But he was a very efficient killer. Yeah. But he was a very Hawkman type where he's just very accurate. Yeah. He gets his marks, he gets his kills where he needs to go. Very unassuming. Very you watch the Avengers and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and obviously Hawkeye's just like the regular guy. He's just the everyman. He's got a family.
He take you in and give you some soup, man.
Yeah. He rolls in. He's like, I'm here. He has the gall to shoot arrows at what's his face? I'm gonna look like a dumbass now. With Scarlet Witch.
Quicksilver?
No.
Oh, shit.
Dude with the mind
Vision?
jammer. The Vision.
Okay.
Shooting arrows at Vision like that's gonna do anything. Yeah. But he's just well to do anyway, and that's kind of like Simo, just a really regular guy, just a farmer, just a dude who's working on his farm. Is like, I gotta go do war now, and then he goes and
he does war
big time.
Okay, the other one is Michael Maloy. Mm-hmm. Luke Cage is he's impervious.
And the amount of punishment the fella
everything
can take.
that the guy can take.
Yep.
So quickly talk about what Michael Maloy's life was like.
So Mike Maloy, this is one of my favorite episodes I ever did because it's such a ridiculous story. And Mike Maloy literally is the most unassuming guy on earth, and that's the thing. His story isn't interesting because of him. He didn't do anything. He's just a dude. He is just
he didn't change the world.
Yeah, he's just a poor Irish immigrant trying to make some money working, but he's also a stereotypical massive alcoholic. And these dudes at the bar, this is during Prohibition United States times, and these guys at the speakeasy are like, we are gonna commit insurance fraud, and we're going to take the first sucker we see. And the way they wanted to do it was they figured, this guy's like 10 sheets to the wind.
He's ready to go.
He's ready to die tonight. Yeah. This guy has another shot. He's going to die.
Jesus.
So they figure, we'll befriend him. The owner of the bar is like, we will give him as much booze as he can handle. He will accept gladly, because of course he will. He's homeless. He has no money. He's an alcoholic. He will take anything they give him. They're going to get to know him. They're going to get to know his name and his business and all his things that are about him. They're going to go take out insurance on him. And when he inevitably dies, they will collect the insurance, make the money.
Yes.
The thing about Mike Maloy, as you said, he ended up being a lot tougher to kill than they expected. To the point where they would feed him alcohol. And then feed him more alcohol. And then feed him enough alcohol to kill a man. And he would go to sleep. And he'd wake up and come back for more, and they're like, okay. So they gave him...
Let's go a little more hardcore.
So then they give him wood alcohol, which should kill a person. They
some turpentine, my man.
They did.
And so just as a reminder, it's during Prohibition, and a lot of people who were very hard up to drink would do this, but they would really stretch it out. I mean, right? And it was dangerous even when it was really diluted.
If you were drinking wood alcohol, you had a death wish, or you were just at the absolute limit of your alcohol.
But they didn't dilute this shit.
No, they just gave it to him straight.
They're like, here's a shot
of straight wood alcohol.
And he takes it. He's like, this tastes like shit. Give me more.
Give me more. I don't care. Yeah, they would mix that with like rotten fish, because they figured that would make him, and he was fine with it. They made sandwiches where they like ground up like glass and like stuff, and
nails.
Yeah. And he would eat it, and I don't know what his deal was. I either knew and didn't care, or didn't know and also didn't care.
We all have a friend like that.
But we do, and they pre-show talk, we were talking about friends we've had like that, and we certainly both do. And but they kept feeding him this stuff and feeding him booze, and he would just come back for more. And they're like, "What do you have to do to kill this guy? I mean, is he invincible? Maybe he is invincible.
Right.
Maybe he is unkillable." They get to the point where they hit him with a car like 4 times. Didn't kill him. The only thing that finally got him was they got him all hammered up, drunk, take him to his place, and then like stick like a pipe in his mouth, and then like put like exhaust fumes in it, which finally
gets him. But this
it
was
took
way
like,
after they had. They thought that night that this was it.
Oh yeah, or
and they were
maybe
gonna
it'd be like
flag.
a week, and then they'd be fine. Oh,
Yeah.
this went on for months. They couldn't kill the guy to the point where they're like, "What are we gonna do?" Like it got to the point where it's like maybe we should just shoot him and kill him. But for some reason they didn't, because
Right.
that's like murder, and they didn't want to like look at it like that. They wanted to make it look like he died
Yeah,
naturally.
you have to.
And then they actually got away with it for a second until one of the coroners goes and looks over the body, finds that he was killed by this certain this asphyxiation. He's like, "Well, this is kind of odd."
Yeah.
They pull him up because this guy, all the money and time they spent trying to kill this guy, and the dude couldn't bother to like get him embalmed and
put
buried
him in a nice
properly.
box.
Yep,
Yeah.
they just put him in a garbage piece and basically threw him into a hole, and it got all those guys executed. So there you go. It's a really fun story. One of my favorites I've ever told.
That's a really good
But
one.
he just, I mean, Mike Maloy would just, a durable Mike Maloy was his nickname. That guy could take a hit, and just like Luke Cage, basically getting shot and like, "Oh,
Yeah.
what up?" and just takes it,
My
and takes
skin
it.
is tough.
His skin is tough. You gotta have a special
some stuff.
You gotta have a
Tough
special
skin,
needle,
so-
or you poke it in his eye, if I remember correctly
That's right.
from the series.
All right, so Robert Smalls. I'm gonna give you these last two. Robert Smalls. A little overview on him and
Uh-huh.
who you think he kind of equates to as a superhero.
So to me, Robert Smalls, if you don't know, was a former slave who escaped his slavery by he lived in sort of a seaside area in South Carolina, and he works on the docks as a young man as a slave, and then he's working at a house of one of these people, and he's a really smart, very resourceful guy. So he working on the docks all these times, he finds how to run the ship. He knows all the different ways of how a ship works. He knows all the signals that the captains use to communicate with each other in the water. So eventually he's like, "I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to make a plan." So he plans this whole escape, and one night in the dark of night during the Civil War, he hops on a Confederate ship, and with some of his friends and family, they hop onto this thing, put on Confederate uniforms, and they just set sail, just steal a Confederate warship, and then navigate it around in Confederate waters to Confederate
Yeah,
ships.
he's got the balls to go into the Confederate states.
Because that's all he could do to get out, is he had to go
Right.
around, and so he does that, and he like from all of his memory, he uses the same signals and stuff, and it's dark, so they can't see that it's
Right.
obviously not a white dude stealing his ship. But they're like, "Oh yeah, you're fine." Makes it through all these checkpoints, eventually delivers the ship to the Union, and they're like, "Oh hey man, what's up? Steal a ship, cool." And eventually runs for like Congress and becomes a congressman later on in life. So he's just a real interesting fella who made a very daring escape in the middle of the night in the weirdest sort of way. He didn't just like leave his plantation and run off. He just stole his ship.
Yeah, he didn't go north.
He stole his ship.
He went back in, yeah.
and did his thing.
It's
So
incredible.
I'm gonna go outside of the Marvel and
Yes.
DC universe, and it's gonna be he's James Bond-esque.
Okay.
So I
That
don't know
makes
if you
sense.
consider James Bond a superhero,
I'd
but
say
he,
he's a
he
superhero.
kind of is, right? Because
Yeah.
he's just a never dying. He continues to do James Bond things. He's basically superhuman. I
Hey,
mean, he's
if Bruce Wayne is considered a superhero
Yeah.
with no superpowers, James Bond certainly should be a
That's
superhero,
true.
right?
Bruce Wayne is rich on his own.
That's right.
James Bond is
Scrooge
rich.
McDuck
Yes,
rich.
James Bond is rich from the British government, who backs
right.
his technological fervor. But it's basically true. A regular dude who's very well trained. Robert Smalls is like the James Bond of this time. He just goes around pulling off heists and ridiculous stuff.
That's awesome.
That a guy shouldn't be able to do, but he does, and then he continues to have a ridiculous career thereafter. So that's what I would say with old Robert Smalls. He's a James Bond-esque in his ways. Yeah,
I like it.
Sure.
Okay, going back to episode 1, the
The
very
first,
first,
the first.
numero uno,
Yep.
Theodore Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Our president, Teddy Roosevelt.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you quick. Who do you think I'm going to say for Teddy?
I have no
I haven't
clue.
picked out. If you
I
had
have no clue. That's the thing. Teddy Roosevelt, especially when I listened to your podcast that very first time, again, what I got from high school and college of all of the presidents was just like paragraphs. And so you only got the tippy top.
The byline.
Yeah,
of the
exactly.
whole thing.
You know, like, why was he a great president? Great.
Yep.
You know, like, I probably know before your podcast, I probably knew as much about Woodrow Wilson as I did about Teddy Roosevelt. Mm-hmm. But Woodrow Wilson was a punk-ass bitch compared to Teddy Roosevelt.
True.
So I have no idea who you're going to say. I have no idea.
All right, I'll give you a couple hints. I'm going to see if you can get to it before I reveal it. So, it's a character in the MCU.
Okay.
It's a top-tier character in the MCU. Teddy Roosevelt.
I mean, Captain America.
It's Captain America.
Yeah, okay. So
I mean, who else could he be?
Yeah.
He is
Captain America.
Captain America. I mean, this guy is just he's got his face on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
He's going out there just shooting people because he does. He goes and gets a volunteer regiment to go fight in the Spanish Civil War because he's bored.
Yeah.
Or the Civil War, the Spanish-American War in Cuba. Forms the Rough Riders just to go fight people because that's what he wants to do.
Right.
He's a super nerd historian. He loves reading, but he is just so into like the outdoorsman life, and he's very Steve Rogers-esque. He's the sickly little kid. He has asthma. He's just his parents don't think he's gonna make it or amount to much, and he becomes this total badass, much like Steve Rogers. You give him the super soldier serum, and boom, he's just a superhero.
Yeah,
you know,
but
it doesn't take away his qualities. Because Steve Rogers is still the same kid who grew up in the Bronx and was kind and wanted to stick up for the little guy, but now he could because he's huge and strong and just can. You know, Teddy's the same sort of way. So he's the kind of guy who paved the way for, like, you know, national parks because he respected, that was always part of his character. He respected animals. He respected the land. He wanted to make sure that, you know, his love of the outdoors was everyone's love of the outdoors, you know. But at the same time, dude was practicing jiu-jitsu in the White House. He used to invite people from the street to box him in the White House. Can you imagine, like Barack Obama or President Trump, like, coming out to the thing and be like, hey, you out down the street, you want to fight me real quick? You want to box me?
I think our president right now would tell you he would do that.
Yeah.
But I think when the rubber hit the road,
maybe
it might be a little bit different.
And I think a lot of presidents, especially in modern times, probably wouldn't want to
hell no
fight anybody.
But Roosevelt was just that guy.
He was that guy.
You know?
He would just go. He got shot while making his speech and continued to make his speech because that's the kind of badass he was. I mean, the quote that I love and I used towards the end of that episode, it's been months and I'll still remember, is I can't remember who wrote it exactly, but one man wrote when Teddy finally did pass away that he passed away in his sleep. And he had to pass away in his sleep because death couldn't get him awake. Because, you know, he'd fight death and beat the shit out of him.
That's
and
right.
Death was like,
get him while he's asleep.
Get him while he's asleep because he's not paying attention. Like, that's the kind of guy, you know, in a total encapsulation that he was. He's Captain America. I mean, the most American, you know, speak softly and carry a big stick. We're going to have a huge navy. We're going to just be America. We're just going to be this big behemoth, but we're going to be nice, you know,
and you don't have to do it by being an asshole and,
Nope.
and by flexing your muscles in the wrong way.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep.
It'd be nice if things got back to that.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
He helped the Panama Canal finish. That's
Yeah.
interesting because he was like, let's just do this now. And that's an important shipping route.
It is. Without that, who knows what it would be like.
Ships
right
used to have to sail all the way around
yeah.
South America. Now they could just go right through the middle. I mean, you cut time off and you can reach the west coast of the United States instead of having to pop all. And it's just stuff like that he did throughout his entire life. I mean, he is just top
amazing.
tier. He's Captain America. That's
Captain
what he
America.
is.
I love it. I love it. All right, 2 questions before we get out of here.
Yeah.
In your opinion, who is the biggest villain in human history?
This is a really tough one.
Yeah.
And, you know,
because there's a lot of obvious answers.
There's a lot of bad
then
dudes.
there's not.
So I will say, and to put get behind the scenes again. You know, Aaron and I had talked before the show about maybe some of the stuff we'd cover, and this is one of the things. So I kind of got to thinking, I'm like, what would I say is a huge villain in history? And there's a lot of, like you said, obvious answers. Hitler is a pretty obvious answer. Joseph Stalin's a really obvious answer. Pol Pot. Some people say Fidel Castro is a pretty big villain. Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden. These guys are all pretty well known, pretty bad dudes. I got stuck between 2 guys, and they are they are not guys that I just mentioned. There are 2 men who I think were just real bad dudes and were just awful. Vlad the Impaler, the original Vlad Dracula, the man who Dracula is based off, the Romanian guy who used to impale people for the fun of it. He would impale them, and we're going to get graphic here for a second, through the anus into the mouth, because that's the kind of guy. It's terrible. And he would do that to men, women, and babies. So, I mean, it was just a bad dude. But then I wanted to, because it's tough to see historically if all of that is exactly the way it is. Because, especially back then, right around the time the printing press and the movable type is there, it's like you can just spread a story. And a lot of people would spread stories because they hated somebody. Right. So nobody's really denying that this guy did the kind of nasty stuff he did, but it maybe got blown a little out of proportion because those he was against were like, fuck this guy. This is the kind of dude he is. And so those things propagate. So I picked instead a man named Shiro Ishii. He's a Japanese man who operated a really terrible human experimentation camp called Unit 731. Have you heard of this man?
I have not. This is going to have to be a podcast, I cannot wait to listen to this.
It was going to be an episode, and I have to find a way to fit it into my current kind of series ways, but I'm going to get to it. But the man in charge of Unit 731 was Shiro Ishii. Now, Unit 731 was in China, but it's a Japanese facility. This is during World War II.
Okay.
So, from the Sino-Japanese War, which takes place in the 30s, up into World War II, which takes place in the 40s, the Japanese were like, hey, we're better than everyone over here. We're just going to make empire happen. So they started just taking over stuff. And part of the things they took over were Korea and a lot of China. And they would subjugate the people there to their whim as the Japanese empire. And they built what they called, as the cover, a water purification station. It was not that. It was a human experimentation place. And Shiro Ishii was the main, he was a doctor, but he was like the main, like this guy might be as much of a mad scientist as any of these guys. Okay. Like a really awful, like if you've ever seen Japanese horror, like this is a guy who would be like, this would be the dude
for it, huh?
Yes, this would be the guy who would like, oh, this is the guy. And during the time that Unit 731 was open, they would often take in, usually it was Chinese people in the area, but could be some Korean people, prisoners of war as you got into World War II. So there was very likely a few Americans, maybe some Australians, whoever in the Pacific theater got caught up into this, which I feel terrible about because of the things that they did to those people. But what they would do during their human experimentation was they would do what is called vivisection. Vivisection is when you cut the abdomen and open it up. Okay. They would do it while people were alive and unanesthetized because, according to their theory, was whatever they were going to study. So they would pump these people full of something, whether it's a disease, whether it was whatever it was. They would do something particular to a person, then they would vivisect them and see what it did to them, and then they would die. So it's a horrific, awful way to die. They did it to men, women, and babies. So already awful. They did it to every age bracket that you could do. So that's just horrific to begin with. That's probably the thing they're most known for, was just this awful, human torture. Basically, they would strap people up to wooden posts and then throw grenades in and blow them up just to see what would happen. Wow. They would amputate limbs just to see what would happen, whether or not, how fast they would bleed out, if they would bleed out. You cut a certain place, what happens then? They take limbs, they would sew them onto so you say you cut my right arm off and you sew it onto my left side, now I have two left arms, they would do that.
Do they have any kind of statistics as far as how many people this organization killed or this gentleman
they're
killed?
Saying somewhere well over 10,000 probably. It's tough to say because it was covered up really well during the war. Other things they would do, they would freeze people's limbs and freeze people and then cut limbs off, or let them unfreeze and then see what would happen if gangrene took over. Right. They would inject stuff like anthrax, other terrible diseases. And it was a whole thing. It was let's just do something to these people just to see what would happen, And they did this for 10 good years before the whole thing got shut down. Now here's why he's the biggest villain ever, because that's already villainous stuff to begin with, and I hope my banging on the table isn't knocking the mic in sound-wise. But one of the biggest things that makes him an awful villain is, and we as Americans probably should be a little bit ashamed of this, is when the war ended The Soviets wanted to prosecute this guy. They knew what he did. They wanted to take him to war.
The Soviets wanted to. Yeah.
Yes, you would think that the Soviets...
You know this guy's bad if the Soviets want to prosecute.
They wanted to get justice for this guy in a war crimes manner, much like the Americans did with Nazi Germany. A lot of those guys went on the stand for crimes committed against humanity. The Americans, on the other hand, in a terrible, awful moral thing, granted this guy immunity in exchange for information that he had gotten from his human experimentation. Literally the most immoral, awful thing. He did all this terrible thing to these people, and the Americans were like, as long as you hand over that info, because he was prepared, him and his crew were prepared to destroy all of it, to never tell anybody about it, to cover it up completely. And the Americans were like, hold up, we'll give you immunity if you tell us what you found out. And he lived into the 1950s. He was a doctor in Japan afterwards. He murdered people with his crew, and they got away with it. Completely got away with it. He died of throat cancer when he was like 67. Like, what kind of end does that befit a man who just murdered people like they were nothing? Like they were just like meat. And he's like, well, let's see what happens. That's a pretty bad
somebody
dude.
Who should have seen justice and never did.
And obviously there are a lot of examples of people like him that run camps. I mean, there are German examples as well. Anybody who runs internment camps that end up becoming kind of these focal points of human experimentation are pretty bad dudes. Yeah. It was just, I remember reading about Unit 731 years ago, and I couldn't believe what I read. I was like, I can't believe this happened. This is gruesome and awful. And then, having seen I'm not a huge horror fan, but having seen a couple of Japanese horror movies, I'm like, oh, it's this guy. That's that guy.
That's where he got it, yeah.
Yeah, if you've ever seen Ichi the Killer, don't go watch it, by the way, because it's terrible. That's him, basically. So, that's probably the worst guy that I can think of off the top of my head.
You got to do that podcast.
I'm going
That's
to.
going to be incredible.
I'm going to.
That's awesome.
We halfway did it already.
I know. That's all right. Hey, man. We'll be the spoilers.
That's right.
Right.
This is just a taste of what you'll get.
That's right. So, last question, Kyle. Do you consider any events from history almost too unreal to believe they actually happened? And if so, what is it?
Okay. So, I don't mean to get... I have to preface this because somebody will take it the wrong way. I think that humanity's achievements from the early 20th century up to, the point where we go to the moon and into space is the most unbelievable and amazing thing ever.
Right.
10,000 years of modern history, written language history, and humans basically go from I built a little building, and now I built a couple bigger buildings, and now I've learned how to farm better, and now I've made a couple of inventions. And oh my God, car, calculator, space. It just ramps.
We're going to Mars.
It ramps like this straight up with human achievement. It's unbelievable that you can go from not being able to fly, and then 60 years later you're in the moon.
Yeah.
And I say that's unbelievable because it blows my mind. Not because I don't believe that the moon landing didn't happen. It happened. If you think it didn't, then you're a dumbass. Sorry.
Flat earthers.
Joe Rogan, if you still believe it, I heard your podcast with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he told you 100 times why it was real, how it was real. Believe him. Everybody who thinks that was fake, there's no way that could have really been fake. That's the whole thing, that people just want to believe in a conspiracy.
Sure. Well, and it's a sexy conspiracy.
It is.
Anyway.
So for me, that's the most, just almost unbelievable thing that humans have done. A lot of people have done weird shit.
Yeah.
There are a lot of fun stories of people just doing insane things. There's a lot of, crazy coincidences in human history where it almost seems supernatural, just oh, how could this be? But I just think humanity in general, going from... we use horses to get around to, oh my God, we shot men off of the planet that we live on to a different world. It's in such a small amount of years. And just, you go from there to now, the computers on the Apollo space mission were basically no more powerful than your TI-83 calculator. And now we have literally thousands of times the processing power on our phones that we used to fuck around with all day, and that's what we have. It blows my mind.
And it's getting better.
It's amazing.
It's getting even more incredible.
We can do stupid shit like this, and that's just what we do.
Yeah.
We can just do a show like this where people in the 60s couldn't even fathom this sort of thing.
I can buy a 4 terabyte hard drive for $99 at Target.
Yep.
And I don't even understand terabytes. I just know that it's helping me.
You're from a megabyte part of
society. I am. 512 was pretty freaking stellar. So,
yeah, man, 512 megabytes.
Megabytes.
Yeah, not even a whole gigabyte. And now you can get thousands of times that in the size of like this, and just
So
it doesn't matter.
It's just unbelievable.
Yep.
Yeah, just in general.
We're all going to join the singularity someday. So, people in the future who are watching this in your brain, because it's being beamed in.
This is where you heard it
This
first.
is what humans used to do.
That's right.
We used to just talk because we couldn't read each other's minds because we didn't exist together. So that's fun. That's antiquity for you in like 2890
right.
or whatever year you're watching this.
And for all the kids out there watching this, it is completely possible to have a conversation with somebody
Yeah.
for almost an hour
Yeah.
without picking one of these up
Yep.
and looking down at it.
I got mine out because I thought I was going to have to look up some of the shit that I spouted off, but I'm surprised how much stuff I remembered from my episode. So I did learn something myself from the things that I researched and put out there for everyone to consume.
It's always a beautiful thing when you
Yeah.
can get two guys together to just talk and bullshit and have a little bit of fun,
Yeah.
drink a couple of beers, and talk about things that they're really passionate
Yeah,
about. And
exactly.
that's what I love about your podcast. Knowledge from the Couch podcast, guys. Please make sure you go check it out. It's on Stitcher. It's on Apple, whatever the hell that one's
Yep.
called, Google Play, all that stuff, right?
Anywhere that you can find a podcast. And for my old people out there, take your phone, mind you, your phone that is more powerful than the Apollo missions, open up your Play Store or App Store, whatever you call it, and just put the word podcast in, and you can download an app, and then that app will find any podcast that exists on Earth, including mine. So you search Knowledge from the Couch, and you'll say, look at this blue logo that says KCP and has my name on it, and then you can listen to your heart's desire. So,
Right.
and if you do listen, go ahead and leave me a review. Let me know you're listening. Rate it. Do whatever you want. I don't care what you do. If you listen to it, I just want you to learn something. I don't purport to be the best podcast out there. There are so many podcasts. It's so saturated. I don't purport to be the smartest dude doing a history podcast. There are many other good history podcasts out there that mine's very broad. If you like a really laid back, like if you liked watching what we did here, then you will like what I do on my show. It's just only me. So like pretend he doesn't exist. It's just only me.
Put the wall up right
yeah. And if you like that sort of thing, if you like a really chill historical conversation on something you maybe didn't know about, or if you did, maybe you learned something new. All I want to do is that when people listen that they maybe chuckle a couple times, it's entertaining, something to pass the day by when you're doing whatever you're doing, and maybe you learn something interesting here and there, like what we went over. All these people we talked about, I've done episodes on. So if you liked what you heard here, you will like my show. And if you did, hit me up. Let me know you liked it. I will continue to do the stuff that people want to listen to because that's what I want. I want to put stuff out there, not just because I like to do it, which I do, but because I want people to enjoy the content and stuff. It's a two-way street, and I always encourage that in my show. So, look it up. See what's up with me.
That's right.
On a microphone.
I love it.
Staring at my wall.
I love it. You can find us at, obviously, the YouTube. Mm-hmm. I think that's what the kids call it.
The YouTube.
The YouTube.
The YouTube.
So,
just like the Facebook used to be actually the Facebook, and now it's only that.
I do the online.
You go. You log on.
You do the online.
You do the.
So yeah, check us out. Check us out.
Mm-hmm.
All Things Action on YouTube. All Things Action video cast on Facebook. We are on Gmail. All Things Action videocast at gmail.com. If you still do that, best thing to do if you need to get a hold of us is just hit us up through Facebook on Messenger. If you do like this particular episode, please make sure you hit the like button. Get people to subscribe. The more people we get, probably the better the content is.
Yeah.
So,
the more you engage with what he puts out, by YouTube and Facebook, the more people will see it because that's how the internet works.
Right.
So the more you engage, the more people will come in. The more people who can see what we do here, and obviously I say we, it's his show, not mine. I'm pretending like I've taken over his show too. It is the mashup. This is the hybridization.
This is it.
This is
What is this?
This is when
This is
when
two shows.
This is when two men who love each other very much come together on a show.
That's right.
But yeah, same as like what I just said. Just engage the show. Give it a like, subscribe, leave a comment. That shows that you're listening to Aaron and his son, who's normally in this seat. You're listening to the I am grown up Raiden. I am adult.
from the future.
I'm time skipped. Yeah, I actually came.
Elon Musk figured out time travel.
He did. So you have that
them
to
in the
look
box.
forward to. We're all driving
So.
Teslas in the future. It's super great. But yeah, just
Listening
engage.
to shitty music.
Yeah,
Whatever.
Because it only gets shittier, as we all know as old people. The music that the goddamn kids are listening to sucks always. So, and I'll tell you, as a time traveler, it doesn't get any better. So, sorry, past Earth.
Well, guys,
Earth
I think
one.
that's it.
Yeah.
Kyle, thank you so much
course,
for joining
man.
me on the show, man.
Of course.
This
Good to be
This
here.
is an awesome show. We're gonna do this again
Yes,
very soon.
I hope so.
So keep putting those podcasts out.
You got it,
I want
man.
to keep picking your brain about historical figures and awesome shit like that.
You know where to find me.
That's right. I know where to find you. They now know where to find you.
You know where to find me now, too.
And we appreciate you guys watching. We'll be back next week with another great episode from All Things Action Videocast. Until then, I'm Aaron.
I'm Kyle.
And thank you guys for watching.
That's right. Hasta mañana? Is that what you say?
luego.
Hasta luego?
Hasta luego. Whatever. Thank you guys.
Yep.
We'll see you next week.